They stomped her down hard enough to rattle the floor tiles, right in front of 282 special operations personnel during a live-fire simulation that was meant to teach survival skills, not push limits. She didn't cry out. She didn't retaliate. She got back up. And when the two men tried to brush it off with a laugh, she twisted one of their knees sideways and crushed the other's ankle with a single snap. 7 seconds, 2 decisive takedowns, not a shred of wasted motion. Because that day, she wasn't just demonstrating technique, she was holding back. At least until they handed her a reason not to. Now, before we show you the precise instant both men hit the deck and the statement command filed afterward, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, tap like, hit subscribe, and ring the bell. Because today, she didn't prove her grit by talking. She proved it by breaking anything that tried her. The Atlantic wind sliced across the exposed concrete walkway of Coastal Special Warfare Group 7. It was barely past 0800, but the sun was already burning through the coastal haze, turning the mist into a bright shimmer over the water farther out. The compound throbbed with its usual cadence, boots in sync, commands echoing, metal clanking in rhythm. But today wasn't routine. Today was evaluation day. 282 operators and support staff had been directed to assemble for a cross-unit readiness drill, standard protocol once each quarter. But what set this session apart wasn't the head count. It was the addition of a joint medical response combat module. And standing at the heart of it, quietly adjusting the cuffs of her uniform, was Petty Officer First Class Mara Kessler. She was 28, unassuming in build, dark hair braided tight beneath her cap, her expression giving away nothing. Not frozen, just focused. Most people glanced past her. But if they lingered, they might have caught the faint recon insignia nearly faded off her old Marine jacket, the one she still wore despite the transfer. 3 tours, 2 as a combat medic, 1 embedded with a recon element that officially didn't exist anywhere public. You wouldn't know any of that from the way she stood. She wasn't here to impress anyone. Kessler had been reassigned 6 months prior to the SEAL Logistical Support Wing after a spinal extraction. She performed under blackout conditions, caught the attention of command. She hadn't expected the reassignment, let alone the direct request from an evaluator, but she never questioned orders. Now, posted on the outer edge of the training zone, surrounded by men who could deadlift twice her mass and haul an operator's load across 40 clicks, she was here to do something far more measured, demonstrate how medics survive under fire. Combat medics rarely got center stage. Their drills tended to be quiet, controlled, functional. But this time, the brass wanted something different, something kinetic. They wanted the teams to see what a non-operator could do when boxed in while trying to stabilize a wounded teammate, and Mara Kessler didn't blink at the task. She wore standard gear: tan tactical pants, black compression shirt, utility belt, training gloves, no rank display theatrics, no flashy setup, just what mattered. As she moved to the front of the marked ring, she caught the glances, the smirks, the raised brows. That the medic? Someone muttered near the barrier. Could have at least picked someone who looks like she's been hit before, another said. She heard every word. She always did, but she let it fade like background noise. From the platform, Chief Instructor Harmon gave the official introduction. Today's module will address retention protocols for field medics, specifically how to counter multiple aggressors in tight terrain while tending to a downed operator. Your instructor, Petty Officer First Class Kessler, holds cross-branch clearance to demonstrate controlled disarmament and escape maneuvers. A wave of murmurs rolled through the formation. Someone coughed on purpose. Kessler stepped forward. She didn't project her voice. She simply raised her chin the way recon taught. Not above, not below, just level. "I'm not here to show off," she said, calm and steady. "I'm here to show you how to live when you're the last thing keeping someone from bleeding out while an attack comes from behind." There were no cheers, no applause, just stares. But some of the veterans began leaning forward, posture shifting, no longer mocking, evaluating. The newer ones, the loud ones, kept up their commentary. Kessler didn't care. She tightened her gloves, stepped into the center as the circle formed around her, and signaled to the first volunteer. Behind her, 282 operators watched the woman they had already underestimated. By the end of the hour, they'd remember her name for reasons none of them predicted. It didn't take long for the tension to surface. As the ring closed in, two figures stood out, not because they tried to, but because their presence demanded it. Senior operator Mason Hale and trainee Connor Red, both assigned to Gold Team rotation, both textbook examples of brute force confidence. Marcus stood 6'3", broad as a doorframe, the kind of operator who trained like sheer muscle still decided the outcome of every fight. His arms were covered in rough, jagged tattoos, dates of firefights, names of the fallen, reminders of victories no one celebrated. He carried himself like a man convinced that strength settled arguments before words ever had to. Brandon was younger, slimmer, just finished with his trial assignment and desperate to prove he belonged. He moved like he thought cameras were on him. Half smirk, full swagger, already mirroring Marcus' rhythm the way a kid copies an older brother. They stood shoulder to shoulder at the front of the group, arms folded, boots dug in like they planned to root there, but it was their commentary that caused real impact. "You watching this?" Brandon muttered, tone pitched perfectly for nearby teammates to catch. "She's barely my size and trying to teach us how not to get killed." Marcus didn't grin. He just exhaled through his nose, entertained. "It's medic choreography," he said. "Guess we're supposed to clap when she spins." A few around them snorted, not many, but enough to disturb the atmosphere. To their left, a corpseman with a shaved scalp and inked sleeves shot them a sharp look. He didn't speak, but his stance tightened. Across the mat, another operator, older, wiry, with the distant stare of too many rotations, shifted his attention to Elena and narrowed his eyes. He didn't crack a smile, but Marcus and Brandon weren't interested. They kept to their own circle, even inside the teams. The old-school physical purists, the types who measured you before you lifted a finger, judged your worth before you said a word. Elena didn't react. She ran through shoulder-roll drills with the first volunteer, her motions steady, efficient, no theatrics, no wasted energy. "That's it," Brandon whispered. "Raise the elbow, pivot the hips, magic bulletproofing." Marcus cracked his knuckles deliberately. "This whole thing's a PR trick." He murmured. "Show command we're being modern, toss a woman onto the mat, make the teams applaud, call it progress." "Hey," Brandon added, leaning toward a nearby tech sergeant. "Think jazz hands are next on the syllabus?" This time no one laughed. The sergeant didn't answer. And several operators behind them had gone quiet. It was faint, but the shift was there. Jokes were harmless until they weren't, until the bitterness under them became obvious. The room wasn't against them yet, but the tension had altered. No longer shared amusement, now it was splintered. Elena heard the side comments. You could tell from the slight change in her breath. Still even, still composed, but more intentional now. She didn't look their way, didn't acknowledge them. She simply waited for her volunteer to reset. Chief Harmon caught the whispers, his brow tightening, but he didn't step in. Not yet. This still sat within the gray zone, banter, plausible deniability. But a few soldiers in the back had stopped watching Elena and had started watching Marcus and Brandon instead. Like they sensed trouble before it rose. Like they recognized exactly the kind of men who couldn't tolerate someone breaking their expectations, and what those men might try to reclaim control. Elena Kincaid stepped into the center of the mat with the composed certainty of someone who didn't need volume to command a room. She faced her volunteer, a seasoned operator from Black Squadron instructed to simulate a casualty care ambush. The man dipped his head in acknowledgement and crouched low as if wounded. Elena didn't rely on performance. She spoke steady, crisp, and clear. "When you're treating someone and an attack hits, you're not fighting for dominance. You're fighting for a sliver of time," she said. "You don't overpower. You divert. You don't plant. You break contact fast, precise, no excess." The demonstration started with her kneeling beside the staged casualty, miming pressure on a major bleed. The volunteer sprang upward, shifting into the role of the attacker. Elena moved with him, her knee sliding, elbow threading beneath his strike, her whole frame rolling through his unstable momentum until his mass carried him flat onto the mat with a muted thud. She stayed low, centered, hand lightly securing his wrist in a neutralizing joint hold before he'd fully processed the reversal. The spectators, previously slack-faced and lounging without interest, were now narrowing their eyes, reassessing. Some folded their arms more tightly. A few leaned in. One even muttered, "What the?" under his breath. Elena released the volunteer, rose, and reset without a word. Her second demonstration came quicker. Same compromised stance, same body alignment, different incoming angle. This time, the volunteer charged from behind. She didn't flinch. She dipped, rotated, caught his forearm under hers, shifted her weight in a sharp turn that pulled his momentum forward, then circled, pinning him in a mock choke with her free arm, finishing with a firm base braced between his shoulder blades. Again, no theatrics, no grin, just precise, sterile technique. "Pay attention to the frame," she said. "You're not forcing anything, you're guiding it." Behind her, Marcus scoffed. "Yeah," he murmured to Brandon, "guiding it right into a viral clip." Brandon snorted. "None of this works unless your attacker moves like a buffering video." The comments were louder now, heavier. Chief Harmon glanced over from across the yard, his jaw tightening a touch. He still didn't step in, but his eyes stayed on them longer this time. Elena made no reply. She simply reset again. A third volunteer approached, bigger this round. First-class operator. 240 at least. No choreographed steps. Just a general instruction to simulate grabbing her plate carrier from behind, the sort of hit that could flatten someone unprepared. He lunged, and in under 3 seconds, Elena had redirected his grip, dropped her mass, rolled beneath his arm, and slipped behind his footing with her forearm aligned to his spine and her hand resting lightly on the opposite elbow. The man nodded once, tapped out without speaking, and stepped away. Somewhere in the cluster of onlookers, someone whispered, "That's legit," but Marcus and Brandon weren't letting up. "Scripted," Brandon announced. He let her have that. Marcus's grin stretched this time, wide and performative. She can't pull that off with 2 real aggressors. Nobody queues up one at a time in the wild. A few heads swiveled toward them. Not in agreement. Not anymore. Elena drew herself upright, gave a nod toward Chief Harmon, and requested one final simulation, 2-direction approach, pseudo-encirclement. The chief raised a brow but gave permission. She turned back toward the group. 2 assailants requires a different rule set, she said. She called no names, made no taunts, but Marcus and Brandon were already stepping forward, wearing grins like they'd been waiting for this cue from the start. The drill was meant to recalibrate things. That was the chief's word, recalibrate. But Marcus Hale and Brandon Riker didn't wait for directions. They strode into the ring with the kind of swagger that made several other operators instinctively shift aside. Not from admiration, just sound judgment, the kind that surfaces when trouble is about to tip over. Marcus moved first, slow and intentional. As Elena faced the center again, he brushed past her shoulder close enough to make contact. A firm bump, nothing theatrical but enough to test her footing. She absorbed it quietly, adjusted, didn't even glance at him. Brandon flashed a broad grin and exaggerated a stumble behind her, arms swinging like some cartoon parody of taking a hit. "Whoa," he said. "Easy, Doc. Wouldn't want you straining a shoulder before we start the tango." A few uneasy chuckles flickered through the crowd, but they vanished fast. The silence afterward hit harder. Elena stepped back once, reset her stance, checked her distance. Chief Harmon strode toward the edge of the formation. "This is still a controlled drill," he barked. "All actions will follow the approved engagement guidelines unless stated otherwise." Brandon lifted both hands, palms out, like someone pretending they hadn't done a thing. "No stress, boss, just settling into the role." Marcus prowled along the border of the circle, rolling his shoulders as if loosening up before a hunt. Elena finally spoke. Her voice stayed level. It didn't tremble. "This isn't a simulation game," she said. "This exercise replicates close-range combat while under pressure during casualty removal." Marcus chuckled. Not a full laugh, just that short, dismissive breath of someone who treats caution like background noise. "Then replicate it," he said. Brandon had drifted behind her now, close enough to feel, not close enough to touch. "Let's see what happens when 2 aggressors don't ask for clearance," he said, mimicking the earlier mockery. The words fell like a thrown challenge. A few of the senior operators stiffened without meaning to. Chief Harmon hesitated, jaw parting before he shut it again. This had slipped out of his control, but dragging them out now, reprimanding them before anything occurred, would turn it into a scene, and he knew it. So he made a decision. He stepped forward and raised a hand. "Drill continues with me overseeing," he said, voice flat. "No strikes to the head, no deliberate injury. You will enact the confrontation scenario. One sequence only. Clear." Neither man replied, but both dipped their heads just enough to count as agreement. The group had tightened, compressing inward. Not the relaxed half-circle of a teaching moment anymore. Now it was a ring, charged, calculating, waiting. Elena stepped forward into the center. Marcus rolled his neck again. Brandon bounced lightly on his toes, and surrounding them, 282 operators watched without a word. They didn't know what was coming, but every man there felt it building. This wasn't training anymore. This had shifted into something else entirely. There was no cue, no barked order, no countdown, just motion. Sharp, sudden, wrong. Marcus burst in from Elena's right, cutting the line with the certainty of someone who'd cleared 1,000 doorways. Brandon followed a fraction of a heartbeat later from the left. Their timing was rough but unified by the same intent, impact. This wasn't a staged rush. It wasn't slowed for instruction. It was real. Both men committed their full weight into simultaneous driving kicks. Marcus aiming at her lower ribs, Brandon at her thigh and flank. It unfolded in less than a heartbeat. Elena caught only a trace of movement, enough to tighten her core, not enough to shift. The first strike slammed into her ribs. Pain shot through her side in a blunt wave. The second blow folded her leg inward, stripping her balance. Her body dropped hard. Her spine hit the mat first. Her elbow struck after. She rolled on instinct to shield her head, but the air had already been punched from her lungs in a ragged grunt. The sound was unmistakable, not the practiced slap of controlled impact, but the raw thud of a real fall, and the entire ring went still. A boot scraped. A gull cried in the distance. The wind tugged lightly at the overhead rigging, and nothing else moved. Chief Harmon froze mid-stride. One of the medics stepped forward without thinking, then stopped himself. No one else shifted. No one needed to, because at that instant, every trained fighter in that circle understood the same truth. That wasn't scripted. The atmosphere had snapped violently, like a blast without noise, the kind of shift that reframes everything that came before it. What had been light-hearted roughhousing seconds earlier had shifted into something older, deeper. Elena didn't speak, didn't wince, didn't even breathe loud. She just lay there for a moment, expression unreadable, eyes locked in, her chest rising in thin, controlled pulls of air, until her right hand folded inward, found the floor, and pressed. The drag of her glove against the mat seemed louder than the hit itself. Brandon stepped back, uncertain of the quiet he'd brought down. Marcus rolled his shoulders, trying to look unfazed, though his breath had quickened. Someone in the crowd murmured, "She all right?" No one replied, because Elena Kincaid was already getting up. Not slowly, not staggering, but with the snap of a line pulled taut, her boots settling beneath her, her shoulders pinning into place, her breathing leveling out. Then she lifted her head toward both of them. Her voice came low, even, slicing clean through the circle. "You've crossed into live reaction." That was all. But in that single phrase, every man standing there understood. This wasn't practice anymore. This was survival. Elena didn't strike a pose. She didn't flare her stance like a challenger. She didn't add another word. She simply stood with her weight aligned, spine reset, breath smoothed out. No theatrics, no fists raised, just an alteration in presence. Like someone had toggled a system inside her, turning off explanation and turning on execution. Her gaze flicked between Marcus and Brandon once. No emotion. Just recalibration. Marcus cracked his knuckles and began to circle. Brandon flexed his fingers, trying to keep it casual. "Didn't mean to put you down that hard," he joked lightly. "Reflex kicked in, that's all." Elena gave no reply. She stepped forward twice. Not hostile, just reclaiming territory. The way a specialist adjusts position before making an incision. Chief Harmon hadn't moved. No one had. The 282 Navy SEALs stood rigid around them. No longer trainees, not spectators, just witnesses to something they didn't have a name for yet. Something stepping out of line. Marcus finally spoke, voice low, confidence rehearsed. "Still on your feet, huh? Let's see how long that lasts." He didn't direct it at her. He said it to the ring, to the watching bodies, to the shield of bravado that had always cushioned him from repercussion. Brandon exhaled sharply and rolled his shoulders. He glanced at Marcus. A quick, shared nod. Coordinated, assured. They believed they were still dictating pace. Believed they still owned the moment. Elena shifted again, barely visible. Her right foot angled, her left shoulder dipped a fraction, her fingers loosened, and across the circle 3 senior operators exchanged a knowing look. They recognized that posture, not from drills, from deployment. It was the stance of someone seconds away from a confirmed elimination. The crowd didn't murmur, didn't lean forward, they froze. And for the first time, Marcus's eyes flickered too fast. Brandon's half-smile twitched because Elena Kincaid wasn't standing like someone trying to show strength. She stood like someone who already understood the outcome and wasn't planning to intervene. Marcus moved first. He launched with trained precision, no flailing, no missteps. He surged in with the practiced drive of someone who'd rehearsed this 1,000 times. Compact guard, direct advance, leading with his forearm to break balance and lock down the target. But Elena wasn't there. She slipped just outside his trajectory, left foot turning with the clean precision of a blade. As Marcus's arm swept through the air where her body had been, she redirected her momentum inward, catching his extended wrist with one hand and bracing her other forearm against the inside of his knee. A breath of leverage and then, crack. The sound was undeniable. A sharp, dry rupture that sliced across the concrete like a dead limb snapping in still woods. Marcus hit the ground hard, not yelling, howling, as his leg folded beneath him at the wrong angle. The joint buckled sideways and his boot scraped helplessly across the mat as a raw cry tore from his throat, both hands clamping around the ruined knee. Shock rippled through the onlookers, but Mara didn't so much as glance down. She was already turning. Darius froze for the briefest heartbeat, a thin slice of time between registering danger and acting. He launched himself forward too late, desperation overtaking instinct, grasping for her shoulder with his dominant hand. Mara slipped beneath the reach, one foot sliding ahead while the other pivoted behind. She caught his wrist mid-rush, let his momentum carry them both, then torqued downward in a tight, practiced spiral, tipping his balance just enough to send him stumbling. Her heel then whipped upward, slamming into the inside of his braced knee as she rotated. Crack. Not the same pitch as Rowan's break. This one was lower, denser, a sickening grind of bone collapsing. Darius didn't scream right away. He fell first, then the sound ripped out of him, high, piercing, the kind of cry born when agony hits before comprehension does. 2 fighters down, 2 legs destroyed, 1 medic still upright. The crowd didn't roar, didn't exhale. All 282 stood frozen in the circle they'd formed, trapped now inside the ruins of their certainty. One operator leaned over and retched against his glove. Another drew the sign of the cross and whispered, "Dear Lord." Captain Huck stepped forward twice, then halted, hand lifted halfway, unsure whether to break in or simply witness the aftermath. Mara didn't preen, didn't smirk. She retreated a pace from both fallen men and dropped to a crouch, not to finish the job, not to shame them, only to stabilize. She checked Rowan's airway, then Darius's pulse. When she rose again, her breathing was steady, controlled. Not rage, not adrenaline, only regulation. And across the ring, every man who had laughed earlier now stood motionless, because what they'd just seen wasn't arrogance. It was biomechanics. Technique, judgment, all executed in under 7 seconds. The quiet didn't fade. It thickened. Rowan Hale curled inward on the mat, his body wrapped awkwardly around a leg that could no longer bear weight. His jaw was clenched so tight it shook, his cries dwindling into hoarse, broken whimpers. Nearby, Darius Riken rocked on his side, clutching his leg with shaking hands, teeth clattering, not from cold but from shock. 2 men who had strode into the ring like kings now couldn't rise, couldn't form words. The formation held. All 282 remained in place. No one stepped toward the center but her. Mara Solin, still breathing like someone in the middle of a drill, moved away from the destruction she had just created and angled toward the edge. "Get medical," she ordered, voice even. "Darius is losing blood flow in his foot." She wasn't exaggerating. His skin had taken on a worrying gray cast. Captain Hux snapped into motion as if her tone had flipped a switch in him. "Corpsemen," he barked. "Move." Two base medics pushed through the ring. One dropped beside Rowan, already tearing open a roll of compression bandage. The other knelt by Darius and unpacked a trauma kit. The rest of the operators stayed locked in place, boots rooted, arms half folded or suspended in the motions they'd begun before freezing. Their bodies seemed undecided, move closer or stay away, look aside or keep watching. They'd witnessed combat injuries before, bloodier, louder. But not this, not from her. Not from the medic they'd written off 10 minutes earlier as the harmless support tech. Not without warning, not without shouting. Mara didn't linger. She walked to the perimeter of the circle, passing Captain Hux, passing the operators still staring, passing the skepticism that had shadowed her since she arrived that morning. She peeled off her gloves, tucked them into her belt, and stood at parade rest, silent as she watched the medics work. Not triumphant, not contrite, just unshaken. Behind her, someone finally whispered the truth. She didn't react. Another voice followed, quieter, almost reverent. She warned them. They simply didn't accept it. The room filled with the scrape of fasteners, rigid braces clicking into place, and the dull thud of emergency stabilization. Nothing else. No jokes. No side comments. Only a harsh, unspoken reverence that no one dared acknowledge. But it drifted around the mats like a cold presence because everyone finally understood. Elena Kincaid wasn't a female trainer. She was the last person anyone should have underestimated. Within an hour, the chain of command reacted. Marcus Hale was rushed into surgery with a shredded ACL, a cracked kneecap, and a damaged tibial plateau. The surgeons stopped short of calling it a full rebuild, but the orthopedic specialist didn't sugarcoat a single detail. Brandon Riker had sustained a spiral fracture of the fibula and a complete ankle displacement. Blood flow had only been preserved by 6 minutes. By 1400, a formal operational review had begun. Elena Kincaid wasn't arrested, but she was quietly escorted by base security to a sealed briefing cell where a legal officer, an investigative liaison, and a representative from Special Warfare Command waited. She held an at-ease stance. No lawyer, no edge, just focus. The officer before her, silver bars on her collar and a thin laptop open, asked without lead-in, "Petty Officer Kincaid, at what moment did you assess the event was no longer a controlled demonstration?" Elena responded immediately. "When their strikes carried real intent. I was transitioning weight off balance and there was zero pre-contact cue. That moved it out of drill parameters and into survival conduct. Did you give a verbal warning?" "Yes. State it. You've crossed into live response." The room sat in a silence that stretched a bit too long. The legal officer typed a few notes. "We reviewed partial footage from security cam 2. No audio, but the attacks are clear." They slid a still image across the table. Marcus and Brandon lunging, her posture dipping, her head already pivoting. Another still, Marcus collapsed, Brandon midair, the movements sharp, contained, instantaneous. "Was this degree of force required?" the rep asked. Elena kept her tone level. "If I had paused, they would have overwhelmed me." Their injuries resulted from their own forward drive meeting rotational locks and structural failures. I didn't create force. I redirected what they brought. The panel recorded her statement word for word, then advanced to the second phase, witness testimony. Over 30 SEALs submitted formal reports. Their words weren't dramatic. They were clinical. It was not choreographed. They initiated. She warned them. Her response showed complete restraint and precision. The accounts aligned without deviation. Even the medics confirmed the timelines. Marcus' knee damage resulted from an interior drop pivot. Brandon's fracture came from a heel stop to the fibula head, an exact countermobility maneuver. One operator from Red Squadron submitted a single-sentence note. I've seen worse control on deployment. The review board spent 3 days assembling the full record. No outside pressure, but rumors echoed through the Pentagon, through congressional offices, across internal military threads. A female petty officer incapacitating 2 SEALs in front of 282 observers. Justified or not, it demanded resolution by week's end. The final packet was issued, 52 pages. Medical findings aligned with testimonies, video snippets matched sequence analysis, precedent-supported self-defense, and protocol breach was verified. Elena Kincaid would not face disciplinary measures, but repercussions would land elsewhere. The conclusion wasn't broadcast. No public statements, no briefings, just 3 directives pushed quietly through internal channels. First, Senior Operator Marcus Hale was removed from all active obligations, pending medical separation. His record would note violation of demonstration procedures, disregard for direct instructor command, and initiating unsanctioned force during a live evaluation. 2. Cadet Brandon Riker was pulled from the Gold Team track without timeline for return. His file now carried marks for unprofessional conduct and intentional risk-taking during a controlled scenario. 3. Petty Officer First Class Elena Kincaid was formally cleared of all wrongdoing, entirely and without qualifiers. The phrasing in her assessment was sterile but decisive, responded to unwanted force within established tactical parameters, demonstrated proper restraint in counteraction. No breach of military code, no lapse in medical response protocol. There was no formation held for it. But in a cramped briefing room beside the training hangar, Command Master Chief Julian Reyes, a 23-year lifer known for keeping silent during reviews, asked her in for a private exchange. He didn't lift his eyes from the paperwork when she entered, didn't offer a greeting. He simply said, "I've watched seasoned operators freeze in situations like yours. You didn't. And you didn't swing too far the other way either. You handled what needed handling, and you didn't try to turn it into a spectacle. That's why it hit as hard as it did." He scratched a note onto the sheet, tore the page loose, and slid it across the desk. A reassignment order, temporary field lead rotation, medical tactics liaison, immediate start. Not a ribbon, not a ceremony, but it carried weight. It meant they weren't just excusing the incident. They were building forward from it. Later that week, someone in admin updated the internal shift roster. Her name still appeared, but now without an asterisk, without an apprentice note, without any parenthetical qualifier, just Kincaid E., lead Tier 2 protocol instructor. The men didn't say much about the change, but they saw it, and none of them stepped into that sparring ring again without recalling the day someone tried to break her and ended up the one limping away. The compound felt calmer afterward. 2 weeks had rolled by since the confrontation, and routine had mostly restored itself. Dawn conditioning, live round rotations, breach and clear cycles. Yet something else had settled too, a subtle shift in how bodies moved when she entered a bay. Not deferential, not fearful, just attentive, measured. Elena Kincaid carried herself no differently. Same uniform, same gloves looped into the same belt strap, same brief responses, same early arrivals and late departures. But no one called her Doc anymore like it was a punchline. They used petty officer or ma'am or nothing at all. Just a nod as she passed. Late one afternoon, after a low-slope extraction drill in a gravel lot by the southeastern fence line, Elena was packing medical supplies into the rear of a Humvee when she heard slow steps behind her. She turned to find Operator First Class D&E Rowley, one of the older hands. 8 deployments, graying beard, eyes the texture of grit. He hadn't spoken to her once since she joined the unit until now. He glanced at the trauma shears she was sliding into place, then met her gaze. "You didn't drop them because you felt like it," he said. "You dropped them because they gave you no choice." Elena didn't reply. He dipped his head once, just once, and walked off. That was all of it. No handshake, no medal, no apology on behalf of others, just clarity. And that clarity traveled quietly, carried by repetition, reflected in how they watched her during drills, in how no one questioned her position on the line again. In the way, younger candidates started asking her for guidance instead of cracking wise. No one mentioned Marcus Hale or Brandon Riker aloud. Not in debriefs, not in chow queues, not in locker aisles, but everyone remembered. Not as rumor, not as spectacle, as a hard-earned lesson. What Elena did wasn't rage. It was survival. It was what happens when ego challenges training and loses. She wasn't just the medic now. She was part of the formation, and the only woman in the room who didn't need volume to command attention. Would you have stepped into that circle if you knew what she could do? Do you think she pulled her strikes, or did they simply push too far? Let us know in the comments below. If you believe discipline outranks pride every time, tap that like button, hit subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss what's next. Share this with someone who still thinks strength only comes in one form. And when you're done, check out the other stories queued on your screen right now. We'll see you tomorrow, same hour, with another new one.